Good morning and happy Wednesday. Welcome to our dosha talk for today. I'm excited to see you guys this morning. It's a beautiful day where I live. It's been really chilly the last few days, and this morning when I took the dogs for a walk, it was finally warm enough I didn't have to wear gloves. So I was really excited about that. It's beginning to look a lot like fall. Last night, my daughter and I, my little almost 8-year-old, were in the grocery store. And we like to sing, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas when it gets closer. And in this case, we started singing, it's beginning to look a lot like fall. So welcome to fall, everyone. As a reminder, tomorrow is the first day of our fall cleanse. Are you guys excited? Yes? As you're coming in, I know you're all giving me thumbs up. It's going to be an adventurous 16 days. I know that that might sound long, but just know that we're going to work through it day by day, and it's a really beautiful process. My husband said, "Are you planning to have your last supper tonight before you begin?" And I said, "I don't really need to. I don't think that's part of this type of a cleanse. It's not about suffering. We're not going to go on 16 days of suffering. It's just going to be a beautiful experience." So watch your inbox today if you're listening to this live, later on the replay, if you're listening to it today, or for those of you who are on the call, I'm going to be sending an email out that's got a little more information just to kind of get us in the right frame of mind. It's important that we have a good intention moving in. But welcome, welcome. We're going to talk today about doshas. So this is a call where you are welcome to ask questions. I want to get more clarity about your own dosha, and we're going to have a little bit of fun with it as well, and just answer any questions that people have, but also allow you to kind of be in that space. Hi, Astrid. Hi, Lynette. It's just coming in. So as we jump into it, I'm going to use some slides because I like to have I like that visual connection. It's hard sometimes when you have a lot of information to just hear it audibly. So if you are watching this later or listening to it later on the private podcast, this is a good one to actually watch because there's going to be a lot of visuals. We're going to have a lot of photos that we're going to look at because I think it helps to compare different doshas to each other so that we can get a better idea. And I hope you guys are all having a great day. It's fun. I know we're kind of all around the country, so it's different times. For me, my kids just left for school. So this is like the happy time. The house is quiet, it's clean, it's nice. And then they all come home at 3 and it gets crazy again. So we're going to enjoy the quiet together for a bit this morning. All right, so welcome to Dosha Talks. We're going to do these once a month. They won't always look the same because this is the first month of Scholars. I wanted to kind of create a platform for this to help you understand how we're going to work with them going forward. So today's going to be a lot of information, but don't feel nervous about asking questions. Okay, if you're having any, as we're going through, if you're seeing something come up within your own dosha that you're wondering, well, is this a symptom or a sign of this dosha within me? Ask questions because sometimes it can be confusing, right? We have a hard time with clarity. So we obviously know Vata, Pitta, Kapha are our doshas. I wanted to remind you about Prakriti from a little bit of a deeper level than what we talk about just outside of this program. So our metabolic pattern is also called our Prakriti. When we think about that, it's the way that our body functions, right? Metabolism or metabolic processes are how our body actually takes in information, uses it, and then creates something at the end of it. So we can call that Prakriti. Prakriti also means nature, she who is the first creation. If we take a step back into Ayurvedic philosophy, we have a combination of two things that form a creation or a being. We have Purusha, which is innate intelligence, it's like consciousness, and we equate that to the male dominant power, okay, so male energy. And then we have Prakriti, sometimes it's called Prakriti, and this is the female energy. And that's why when it says nature, she who is the first creation, it's this combination of the two, of the Purusha, Prakriti coming together and forming this first primordial sound. So in Sankhya philosophy, that's kind of Ayurvedic philosophy, we know that that first sound was the beginning of creation, and it was Om. That's why we say Om as a way to balance our energy. That vibration is the first sound of creation. So it brings us back to a more harmonious state. So chanting Om is a really beautiful way. If you're not comfortable with chanting it yet, practice it by yourself. Go in your closet and close the door and just chant Om for a few minutes and allow yourself to just see what that vibration feels like in your body, because that is that combination of the male and the female energy. It's a good mantra as well if you're feeling like you're too far into one versus the other. So if you're really stuck in the dominant male and you want to be more feminine and feel in touch with your emotions more. Or if you're feeling very watery and emotional, you can switch back as well by going into that space of Om. So your individual Prakruti, we call this your first creation. It's the reaction when you're forced to adapt to your environment. Because when you were created at conception, you came into this new environment. And there's a strong belief that the soul within Ayurveda, that the soul comes in at that time of conception. And so if you're having to react to the world around you, which at that point was your mother's womb, the Prakruti was formed in order to face that situation. That's why we understand that the mother and father's nature, their divine nature and their karmic tendencies have a big impact on who you are as a person and your Prakruti, because you're taking those two things together with your own karmic energy, and those are forming your Prakruti or your individuality. And that's why everyone's different, right? None of us have the exact same circumstances, situation, even from one sibling to the next. The circumstances in which they were conceived, the energy of the parents at that time of conception, the karma that they've accumulated is completely different. And so that's why no two siblings are the same. So things you like about yourself come from your Prakruti. Things you don't love about your personality or the way that your body functions also come from your Prakruti. So we got to just take the 50-50, right? There's good and there's what we label as bad. It's not truly bad. It's just things that we would wish that weren't there. So the tendencies or traits are always present. This ties in with genetics a little bit, because when we look at genetics, they'll talk about having dormant genes that don't manifest unless the environment creates that. And so we understand from Ayurveda that you have these tendencies or traits that come with your Prakruti that are always within your cells or your genes, right? They're activated or deactivated by many things that we do. The tastes that we eat, so the taste of our food can affect it. The lifestyles that we lead, but by themselves, they'll never change, right? They just don't really change over time. And this is something that can be confusing because you might feel like you're a different person now than you were 20 years ago. That's the evolution of who you are. That's not actually changing your innate nature. Okay, do you guys have any questions about that part? Because I know Prakruti and Vikruti, sometimes we just get them mixed up a little bit and they get to be sort of meshed together. So our goal in this program, and especially with the Dosha talk, is to kind of separate it a little bit. So we start to see the difference between the two. All right, so there's our little review on Prakruti. There's some really excellent resources out there studying Prakruti. So if it's something that you're interested in, just kind of be looking around, you'll find it'll come to you because that's something you're drawing to you. Now, when we talk about just doshas in general, we know that doshas can be infinite numbers of combinations, right? We are all three, and the percentages or the varying amounts of each dosha within us is unique specifically to us, as well as how the elements work within that dosha. But we categorize them Ayurvedically into 7 main types. So someone who is predominantly Vata, like they really lead with Vata, if you were to do an analysis on them, they're majority Vata. Someone who's Pitta, someone who's Kapha, someone who's both Vata and Pitta elevated, and you could switch the order there and say Pitta Vata and it wouldn't matter. Sometimes people will list their doshas when they're telling you if they're mostly Vata and then secondarily Pitta, they'll say I am Vata Pitta, and that's fine to indicate it in that way. But when we write them here, we're just showing that Vata and Pitta are both elevated to a high enough level that they're impacting you doshically pretty strong. Whereas the Kapha is low enough, it's not actually causing any impact in a big way, okay? Pitta Kapha, Vata Kapha, or tridoshic, Vata Pitta Kapha. And for some reason, we think we want to be this golden unicorn of tridoshic. It's actually really challenging and hard to stay balanced because there's so many factors that you have to be constantly thinking about. And thankfully, there's very few people who are truly tridoshic. So that's probably not going to affect any of us, okay? So I wanted to go deeper than we would go with just normal Vata Pitta Kapha. So we're going to talk about those other variations, because looking at this, you probably immediately go, oh, this one's more me, or I'm more Vata Kapha, or I'm more Pitta Kapha. You might just have one that you feel like, really, I'm 80% one of those. And that's actually an easier place to be. So if that's where you're at, yay for your karma. You didn't do anything to deserve or to earn that or to create that other than just to be you. So that's a beautiful thing. Really quick review, okay, because then I want to get into the meat. So Vata is all about movement, air and ether. Its main home is the large intestine. You'll see that with our cleanse yoga sequence that will be posted tomorrow, that we're really focusing on moving Vata energy because it's fall. And so a lot of the movements that we do focus on that large intestine, pelvic cavity area. So that's its main home. Physical symptom is pain. This could be emotional pain too. So anything that's creating pain. And then the qualities I like to most focus on are those first three, the cold, dry, and light. Okay, so we'll talk about those some more. Pitta, reminder, it's all about digestion, metabolism. Fire and water, mostly fire. It's in that lower stomach and the small intestine. That's its main location. All those other areas have a lot of pitta in them, especially like the liver, the spleen, the gallbladder is not listed there, but it should be. And then physical symptoms are fever or heat. That's also emotional. So when you get embarrassed and you blush and your face turns bright red, that's pitta, right? That's the circulatory blood coming to the surface. Qualities we focus on are those first three: hot, moist when they're balanced, and light. We'll talk a little bit more about that moisture because that actually gets really confusing sometimes. And if you watched one of the foundational videos, the one about the elements, I talked a lot about how Pitta kind of defies the rules in a lot of areas. And that's one of them, is with that moist versus being dry. All right, and Kapha, last one. This is all about lubrication, holding things together, structure. So when you think of Kapha, it's our builder, earth and water. Location primarily is in the stomach, but it does affect a lot of other areas, especially the chest and the heart. Physical symptom is swelling. I like to think of the emotional side of this because when you have a strong emotion, you feel like water is rising, right? You feel like your chest is expanding, like you can't control the emotional water that's coming up to the eyes to cry. So if you feel those swelling feelings, you know this is a Kapha time. That's a Kapha emotion. And the qualities, those first three: cold, moist, and heavy. So those come into play because we're going to talk about food here in a sec. All right, I'm just going to keep checking in. If you guys have anything you need to ask me or say, jump in. All right, Vata type. So this goes a little deeper than what we've worked on before, and we're going to talk about these pictures. We're actually, I had so much fun. You have no idea, pulling photos for us to use in this talk today. So we'll look at a lot of these. Let's look at her picture first. And I want you to just notice what characteristics are traditional Vata. She's not 100% Vata here. She does have some other things going on. But what sticks out to me very first looking at her is that length and narrowness of her face. You guys seeing that? And how her chin's got that nice point. Because Vatas are like a pinprick. They're thin, long, narrow, and they're very sharp. They can just like stab, right? So we think of anything that's really pointy is going to be more of that Vata tendency. The bridge of her nose is also very long and narrow. You can see that through there. And her lips are more on the moderate side, but if you look at her teeth, she's probably one of the few people in the world that maybe hasn't had orthodontia work. And you can see a little bit of irregularity in how her teeth are positioned with each other. That's also a sign of Vata. Her complexion is a little bit more on the pale Kapha side. But if we were able to see her without makeup, we may see that it's got a little more of an ashen tone to it. Problem is most people wear makeup, so it's harder to tell with that. But when you look at her, you would think her physical structure would also be tall, long, lean. Yeah, just looking at her face. Okay, so Vata types, they're very changeable. Lots of motion happening. Change is probably the biggest characteristic of Vata. So I want you to look for yourself in these. Even if you're already pretty set on what your dosha is, I want you to see, are there things that I'm not noticing that maybe I didn't realize came from that other dosha? So Vatas are usually pretty thin. They don't gain weight easily. Unless they're eating very excessively, they really don't gain weight. They have narrow shoulders and hips, so they're going to have more of that straight line, but be very thin. Their joints will crack. There's a lot of research about this, just that there's more nitrogen actually in the joints of someone who has Vata, and so they're able to pop their joints a lot easier, and often without even trying. They just move and they make cracking noises. There's dryness in the joint as well. They're very fidgety, so they don't sit still. When I sit with clients, it's fun to watch what their bodies do, because if they're moving, constantly adjusting how they're sitting, how they're moving, if they're able to sit forward, then they got to cross their legs again. That's very Vata. Dry skin, their skin chaps easily. They're very sensitive to the wind. They can get corns and calluses. So that dryness will create just these little protective spaces. Their hair is usually coarse, dry, and curly. So this is how we know this girl is not all Vata, because look at the slip and silkiness to her hair. She has much more Pitta hair, and her other features are a lot more Pitta as well. So they have cold issues, poor circulation, especially hands and feet. So if you're noticing your hands and feet are cold, it's a rise in Vata that has increased, and we want to warm you up. Their skin's typically cool to the touch, but not clammy. So cool and clammy is more Kapha. Cool and dry is more Vata. They don't sweat a lot, but they want to be out in the sun. They love the heat. It feels really good to them. Irregular appetites, irregular eating habits. They're just kind of all over the place, and that leads to this chronic constipation that they'll have. They like soupy, oily, hot foods, but their tendency is to go to extremes. And so they might eat really heavy and dense for a while, and then they might go on a really rigid fast where they're not eating anything but liquids or not having any heavy foods. That's an extreme. Anytime you see those extremes in behavior, that's a Vata. So if you're doing that, if you're doing anything that's like binging and eating too much and then depriving yourself, that's a Vata emotion. So you would calm Vata to help heal that. And then a lot of fluctuations in energy. These are really good at sprinting and short, fast things, but not endurance events, which is really interesting, right? Because we, as a culture, tend to want to be thin and small. And we do it through a lot of hard, rigorous exercise, which just increases Vata energy and dries and dehydrates us. So it's not a good thing. We kind of do what we shouldn't be doing. All right, let's look at this gentleman here. Now he's smiling. Sometimes that can make it harder, but I just liked some of the things about his face, besides the fact that he looked so nice and happy. So he has that same length and angularity. So look at his chin and jawline. Then I'm going to switch back to the girl. Look at her chin and jawline. Do you see how similar they are to one another? So that's a very good characteristic trait. You can see that long, thin angularity through the chin and jaw. Now his nose is got a combination of doshas. It's more Vata through the bridge of the nose because it's pretty narrow, but it's more Pitta at the end. His end of the tip of his nose is not super small, so that's more Pitta. Now his lips, when he's smiling like this, look pretty Vata. When he isn't smiling, they might look a little more Pitta, but I would give him a Vata. He's got thin lips in there. And then his eyes, they're deep set and probably more on the Pitta side when he's not smiling. But I really just liked this photo because of the length of his face. So you could see that long, narrow shape of his face. So going into some more characteristics of Vatas, they tend to get exhausted really quickly, and they're good at pushing through until the exhaustion wipes them out, and then they have to take a rest. And they lean towards more stimulants. So if you have a friend who's always on the go and moving, and if they sit, they'll fall asleep, that's a Vata characteristic. And they'll tend to drink like coffee or power drinks or energy drinks, things that have a lot of caffeine in them to help them go through because they don't want to slow down. They just want to keep going and moving and moving. And this all cycles into causing problems with sleep. So even if you feel like I'm not very Vata, but I do tend to kind of push through until I'm super tired, but then I don't rest, you're actually overtiring yourself the same way that we do to children when they don't get enough rest. So we have to make sure we're taking breaks throughout the day and creating a little bit more structure so that it's not just wake up, hit the feet on the floor, and you're going until you drop your head onto your pillow because you won't sleep. And it seems counterintuitive because if you're going all the time, shouldn't you be so tired that you do sleep? Well, if you push it far enough, yes, you'll be like this example and you'll sleep like the dead. But if it's just that regular state of exhaustion that you're constantly in, you're not going to rest. You won't be able to sleep. Vatas feel pain really intensely. This is something I did not understand back when I was having children because I didn't know why it was so hard for some women to not have pain medication during childbirth and why it was so much easier for others. And I kind of blamed it on like willpower or strength of mind or something, like you're just being wimpy. And it's actually nice to know it doesn't have anything to do with that. It's more doshic. So Vatas feel pain very intensely. This is also emotional pain. You can really hurt a Vata. They're very sensitive. They don't tolerate loud noise. Again, the nervous system, it's like it's closer to the surface. It's more sensitive than all the other doshas. So loud noises, they startle a lot easier. They just tend to need things a little quieter. And yet they always are going and making things like loud and noisy in their lives. Trying to avoid pain often, it makes them seem really fearful. And so when someone is a Vata and they're feeling fear, or you're feeling fear and you're not prominently Vata, your Vata energy has risen. And so if you can look at this like, I'm feeling fear because I'm trying to avoid something that I think is painful. And it might not even be something you consciously think is painful, right? It could be that it's something that's, when you were a kid, this might have been scary to you. And so you're still holding on to this fear. And it might just be fear of the unknown. But even just exposing that and being able to see, oh, I'm feeling fearful just because I'm trying to avoid something. How about I feel the emotion and see what is it that I'm trying to avoid that's painful? And maybe you can recognize that the pain that you think is going to happen isn't actually there, right? It's something that you're creating through your thoughts. So that helps Vatas to create a little more faith and less fear. And Vatas do really well with massage. They love it. It allows their nervous system to wind down. So my parents are really funny. Side note, my mom has a lot of Vata imbalances and has for many, many years, something she's worked on and struggled with. My dad's very Kapha. My mom adores massage, would get one 2 or 3 times a week if the time and resources that were available to her. My dad does not like massage. Now, as a massage therapist, I'm always offering to my family some time. And my dad started running a marathon, and it took him training for this to finally allow me to give him a massage. And now he's starting to see the benefits, but he doesn't love it still the way that my mom does, because Kaphas don't tend to want that time the same way that Vatas do. For Vatas, it calms the nervous system down. And they tend to be erratic in their life. So, okay, this is the part I really want you to be aware of here on the bottom. So the best taste for a Vata, sweet, sour, and salty, we've talked about. You want to avoid bitter, pungent, and astringent. We're moving into fall season. This is going to be important to keep you balanced through the fall. So start bringing your focus more to these grounding tastes and then avoiding some of these others. When we say avoid, it doesn't mean we don't eat them. All right, we need all 6, but it just means they're in smaller quantities. So your leafy green vegetables are going to be in smaller quantities, or we're going to add a little bit of heaviness to them by sauteing them, putting a little bit of oil on them, maybe cooking them in ghee. And we may not need quite as much hot spices. We definitely need some, but that's not going to be the most balancing for Vata. And then astringent foods are really going to be hard on a Vata just because they pull moisture out. So if you're going to have a baked potato, make sure you're having that maybe in a soup, so it has moisture, because potatoes pull moisture out. So just start looking at, what does this food do when I eat it? And it takes a little intuition and then just some practice with it. And we're reducing that cold, light, and dry qualities. And then we're increasing warm, heavy, and moist. Okay. All right, let's do another picture. All right, this girl's fun. Look at her cute Pitta face. She even has, her eyes are a little soft. So she could go a little towards Kapha because she's not super intense with her eyes, but they are a little bit more deep set. And there is a lot of, you can tell there's some intelligence behind those, right? You can see that in her eyes. And I like, again, her jaw, for you to look at her face shape. It's a little bit more square. So if we go back to this one before, do you see how he had kind of more length from the forehead down to the chin? She has a little bit more of a square shape, and she has a little shorter space between the lip and the chin. So that helps us to see some of that Pitta. Her nose, very moderate. Pitta nose all the way. Lips, moderate. Pitta all the way. You could maybe, if you saw her in person, argue that maybe her bottom lip is a little bit more full, but it still looks pretty balanced for her face. And if you can see as well, she has a few little freckles on her face. These little freckles here, those would be things that are definitely a Pitta characteristic, okay? So Pittas are really intense. They get hot easily. They're irritable. They're medium across the board. Anything that is just average is a Pitta. Their skin's a little bit lighter in color, but they blush very easily. These are your kiddos that exercise, and after 5 minutes, they're bright red. They look like little tomatoes. My son's face does that. And so they also get burnt really easily in the sun, have a lot of freckles and moles. The hair is very straight. Her hair is very Pitta. Do you see how it's just straight, plain? It's not super light in color, but it's also not very, very dark. So she's kind of in the middle there. Redheads are all at least partially Pitta. So there's kind of a joke that if you're a redhead, you've got fire in you. You do. So redheads are usually leading with Pitta, or it's their secondary. They sweat really easily, Pittas do. There's a lot of heat inside, and so the body's trying to release it. So this is also why we sweat more in the summer, because we're trying to release heat, but Pittas do that year round. Appetite's good. They love to eat. Here's why. It's interesting to understand the why behind it. Food, when you eat food and drink food, it actually lowers the internal heat of your body because you're bringing in something that is not as hot and then it's calming it down. So when you do feel overheated, having a beverage, not a cold beverage, even just a room temperature, is going to cool things down. Eating something cools things down. It gives a place for the heat to direct its energy instead of coming into circulation. So that's why it helps. They get pretty hangry. They don't like to miss meals for pittas. All right, let's look at this gentleman. Do you guys see, are you starting to kind of see some of these things I'm describing? He's got more of that squareness through his chin. And we want to look, we're going to have a lot of pictures of different ethnicities because it's important for you to see that characteristics are different from one ethnicity to another, and what might be full lips in a Caucasian might not be considered full lips in an African American or in an Asian. So it's different. So when we're looking at this picture, very Pitta eyes, they're average size, deep set, Pitta face shape, Pitta nose, lips could maybe borderline Kapha, but we could do a Pitta Kapha on his lips. Now, when we compare him to others with his same ethnicity, we might decide that his lips are just average. But when you're just looking at him, you can see his lips stand out a little bit. So we can maybe say Kapha on his lips with a little bit of Pitta in there too. Okay, and he's got a piercing. Do you see how his eyes kind of look almost like they're looking into you? That's a Pitta thing as well. All right, so he has a little bit, not him, I don't know if he has looser stools, but Pittas have looser stools. They don't get constipated. Their mind's very clear. They are kind of our impatient friends though. If someone's talking slow or taking a while to get to their point, they'll get frustrated. They don't want to spend a lot of time on the small talk and the chit chat. They want to get to it. They sleep really well. Here's something that I've noticed as being a predominant Pitta type is that they tend to sleep well, but if you get really obsessed with a project or your work, you're going to tend to not sleep as good because you're up thinking about it. And that could be anything from remodeling something in your house that you're kind of getting obsessed with to problems that you're having with one of your kids and you're trying to strategize and figure that out, to stresses that you're having at work and trying to organize and figure things out there. The best thing I have found for that is to give a good separation of time between bed and those activities. So if you're up working right until you go to sleep, your mind's going to spin a lot more. If you're working on a house project until you go to sleep, it's going to spin in that project. So for Pittas, that space is even more vital between work and sleep. You've got to have some distance there. Pittas tend to be pretty intense and competitive in everything. So even in your yoga practice, you have to watch this. And they get angry pretty easy, but they don't always express it. So just because a Pitta doesn't say that they're angry doesn't mean they're not, which is like, oh, really? Are you walking around angry all the time? So they do have the ability to control their temper, but they will feel those emotions of anger. Best taste, sweet, bitter, and astringent. Don't eat as much of the pungent, sour, and salty. Those tastes all have a lot of fire in them, and they'll create more heat. So if you're noticing I'm drinking a cup of coffee in the morning and then I'm kind of irritable for those first few hours until I actually have food because I'm skipping breakfast, it's creating this perfect storm for anger and all of the emotions that come up with Pitta. I had a client that would always drink coffee in the morning before he'd go to yoga practice, and then he felt judgmental and critical about everyone, including himself, the whole time he was at yoga. So when we shifted that and stopped doing the morning coffee, suddenly he loved yoga so much more, and yoga hadn't changed. The people were exactly the same. It's just he hadn't increased all those bitter, kind of acidic emotions before he went to class. With Pittas, really focus on reducing the heat. That's going to be your biggest one. So just get the heat down. You also don't want to have as much lightness or dry. Here's where we're going to talk about dry and moist. Okay, Pittas are more oily. When we combine the fire and the water together, it creates oil. So sometimes you'll see it written that they are dry, and sometimes you'll see it written that they're moist. If you start being confused by this, here is the reasoning. When you say a Pitta is dry, it's because the fire element is a little more out of balance than the water. We know there's always more fire than water, but if that water is receded so much because of the heat of the fire, you're going to be dry. If the water is in balance to the fire, not that it's the same amount, but it's balanced quantity-wise to keep that fire controlled, then you're going to be more moist and oily. So you'll know as a Pitta, if you start to feel really, really dry, that's actually a sign that you're out of balance. When you are more moist and a little bit more oily, that's a sign of being more balanced. Okay, so that's why you'll sometimes see it written dry, sometimes see it written moist, sometimes it will say oily. So don't get confused by that. They're all talking about the same thing, but your mind will know Dry means out of balance a little bit. Moist and oily means I'm a little more balanced. But it's still a quality that we don't want to have excessive amounts of. We don't want to get too much, and then we'll end up with skin rashes and oily digestion and oily stools and all those problems. Okay, and so we're going to increase coolness. So for Pitta, just really focus on the temperature. All right, here's our Kapha friend. She looks a little intense in her eyes, though. She has more Pitta eyes. You see how she's kind of staring us down a little bit? But you can see the roundness in the Kapha face, the roundness through her nose, the fullness in the lips, the short space between the chin and the top of the forehead. So all of those things, when you immediately look at her, if your immediate thought when you look at someone is round, that's Kapha. If your thought is long and narrow, that's Vata. If it's more square and boxy, that's Pitta. So we want to just kind of start getting those ideas in our minds. Kaphas are more heavy set. Now they're actually your best natural athletes, which is so interesting because Kaphas don't tend to love to work out a lot. But if we can get them in a groove, they do really good once they're in patterns and rhythms. So if they're exercising properly, they are your best natural athletes because their endurance is incredible. They make your best marathon runners. They make your best endurance sports, triathlons, anything that you have to do for a long time, long hikes. They just have this strength that the other two doshas don't have. Now they can gain weight though really easily just by like looking at food, it feels like, if they're not exercising. So the exercise is probably the most important thing for Kapha. So if you have a lot of Kapha in your dosha, just know that exercise is going to be a part of your life pretty much forever. And that's really important that you keep that in your life. Okay. Now Kaphas are healthy most of the time. They don't get sick as much. Now, if they're overdoing it, if they're overeating and they're doing things to excess, they can end up with diabetes and with all of these heavy diseases that go along with that. But if they're eating in a proper balanced way, they're really not going to get sick much. These are your friends that are like, I don't know what y'all are complaining about. I never get sick, right? So if a Kapha is balanced right now, they probably don't have to be too afraid of COVID because their immune system is really strong. If they're out of balance, that's where we're worried. They like to use food because of emotions, but in reality, they don't actually have a lot of hunger. This is a surprising thing because Kaphas tend to be heavier set. So we assume they're hungrier and they're eating more. They often eat less than our Vatas and our Pittas. They just don't have the digestion in order to break all of that down. And so it's important that they see if they are heavier for their dosha, like heavier than a Kapha should be, are they emotionally eating? And when you emotionally eat, it's usually Kapha driven. It's this desire to not feel these deep emotions. Kaphas are most emotional. Remember when we talked about swelling? The emotions kind of swell within you. So Kaphas feel things really deeply, but they don't always let them come out. And when you hurt a Kapha's feelings, they might not tell you, but they're going to feel that at a deep level, and it's going to be very painful for them emotionally. And this is one reason why they use food to balance that, because they don't want to deal with those emotions. They're too hard. They're too painful. Kaphas like comfort. They like to feel good, and they don't want to feel those emotions. So just know if you are emotionally eating, it is Kapha driven. Probably the best thing to do is put down the food and go for a walk, right? Use that movement of your body to allow yourself to feel your emotions. And that can be really useful and helpful to find a channel or an outlet for that. I have put my 12-year-old daughter, who is very Kapha, into boxing because she just needs a way to move her body that isn't necessarily competitive, because it's just boxing against a bag, and that is fun for her, and it's in a group setting, but it's allowing her to feel emotions. This last week we went to class. She didn't want to go, and I've been going with her to help her to kind of get comfortable and used to the setting, because it's not a kids boxing gym, it's like grown-ups. And so we're coming home from class, and before we went, she didn't want to go. She was kind of like, man, it was an evening class. And so she and I went. Afterwards, she said, I'm so glad I went, because before I just was feeling really bad about myself and bad about how I looked, and I just wasn't feeling very good, and I kind of felt sad. And she said, now I feel really good. I just feel strong and like I can do anything. And I thought, okay, children are wise. They understand these principles more than we understand them. All right, so, and Kapha's digestion's not very speedy. We talked about that. So they don't get constipated really, but it is harder for them to eliminate. Kapha type, here's another cute picture. All right, so his eyes again are not Kapha. These are Pitta eyes. All right, so just like to tell you that right off. But look at the roundness of his face and those lovely full lips. And then his nose, more Pitta through the bridge, definitely more Kapha through the end. You can kind of see that. So he's got a lot of Kapha characteristics with a secondary Pitta. Let's look at his neck too. His neck's definitely short. There's not a lot going on there in that neck, right? It's pretty wide and short. So all of those things come together to help us see Kapha. There is a dullness though to his eyes. When you look at his eyes, Kaphas tend to have a little bit more, when they're out of balance, they'll tend to have a little more dullness to their eyes, simply because they're just weighed down. They feel kind of heavy, and his eyes give that impression. Now, Kaphas sleep soundly. They don't, but they tend to oversleep. They like to take naps. Again, why movement is so important, right? To get them up and moving. They don't need the excitement or the stimulation like a Vata Pitta. They're pretty happy to just kind of chill and relax and be with just the people they love. They don't need to go to like the clubs or the gym, places where there's lots of people. So they've probably, in that respect, done well during all this quarantine because they don't need to get out so much. But this can cause a lot of complacency and lethargy if it's not checked, if you're just sitting home all the time. And they're averse to change. Kaphas don't love change. Whereas Vatas are all over the place. Kaphas are like, please, can we just have it be the same? And it can cause this feeling in Kaphas of being kind of greedy or stubborn, like they just want things the way they want them. And they're going to react because you are changing things on them. They just want it the same. Give lots of notice to a Kapha person if you have to change schedules or if you have to change the situation and it's going to be different than what they expected. That will help them a lot. And be the motivator. Kaphas do really well if they have a Pitta friend that kind of gets them going. Best tastes are the bitter, pungent, and astringent, so exact opposite of Vatas. And you want to avoid the sweet, sour, and salty. We know that they're heavy, they're cold, they're moist. So we're reducing those qualities and bringing in the opposites, light, warm, and dry. Now it's going to get complicated. You ready? How are we doing up there? Just want to make sure we don't have any craziness. And we've got a whole bunch more people that came on. So I just want to say hi. Hello, Christine. Hi, Deb. Hi, Heather. I like that we have more Heathers. We have 2 Heather Johnsons, me and one of our members. Is that crazy? Right? What a small world it is. Okay, we're going to go back in. I just wanted to check in on you guys here. So Vata and Pitta. Let's look at this cute gentleman. We can see these now that you've seen some just more plain doshic. What are you guys seeing in him? What do you see? I'm gonna turn on the chat. I want you guys to be able to tell me what you're seeing in here with him, okay? All right, Astrid's saying she sees some Pitta eyes. So let's make sure everyone can see what you guys are writing. Okay, so yes, Pitta eyes. And he's squinting a little bit, which makes me feel like they've got a little Vata in there because it doesn't look like he's overly squinting, but they're a little bit small. So I think he's got a deep set Pitta with a little bit of Vata going on as well, yeah? And then when we look at his nose, I'm seeing that bridge being pretty long and thin, and there is a pointiness on the end. Now here's what's tricky. It looks pretty moderate for his face, right? But I think it's borderline Vata Pitta. It's like I'm seeing both of those characteristics in his nose because it's not super narrow, but it's, a little bit thinner. So more Vata in the bridge, but that tip of his nose, I think is more Pitta. Pittas have that angularity and sharpness as well. His lips, obviously, what do you guys think lips? Thinking pretty thin, yeah? So a little bit more Vata in his lips. And then his face shape. His face shape doesn't have the same length that we saw in all of the Vatas, but it also isn't really square. So we've got a little combo there, right? Because he still has that short space between the lip and the bottom of the chin, but he's also got a little bit more length through the cheeks. Now he is in the Vata time of life. We can tell he's a little bit more wise in his age, right? And so Vata time, you start to lose some of that natural roundness to the face. And so he may have had a little more roundness and leaning him more towards Pitta when he was a little bit younger. But putting all those features together, we can go Vata Pitta. And then his face complexion is a little more sallow. He's not super ruddy, right? He's got a little more ashen color to him. So that's more of a Vata as well, kind of that grayish that we get in there, okay? So here's how these combo together, because most of us are going to be a combination. So this is where you want to kind of put on your thinking cap and go, okay, this is me or this is not me, or I'm seeing this in me. So for Vata Pittas, they have pretty poor circulation because of the Vata side, but they like the heat also because of Vata. but there's that Pitta they got to be thinking about. So they can only handle so much. They can do fine in the heat for a while, but they're not going to be able to take as much as just a straight Vata because that Pitta is going to overheat. So it's important that they pay attention to that. Pitta part of them is going to make them love food. They're going to love to eat, but because they have so much Vata, they cannot digest large meals. So if you're overdoing it as a Pitta and you're eating way too much, you're going to have problems with the Vata side of you. Okay, so you got to be careful there. Their hair will show a combination of Pitta, Vata. I was mixing those words up. So they might have, it should say wavy hair. So not way hair, but wavy hair. So Vatas tend towards more curl frizziness, kind of out there. Pittas are more straight. So it's going to be a combination. You could have parts of your hair that are curly and then parts that are completely straight. That's showing that Vata Pitta. Okay, you're combining those two. So if you've always complained because you have a lot of curl right here in the back of your hair, which I know people do this, and then the front is nice and straight, that's Vata Pitta. Okay, so that helps because we're not all one. When they're imbalanced, they might feel fear, but they also might feel anger. And so if you get confused and think, I'm feeling fear, it must mean I'm imbalanced in Vata, that could just be your Vata side. Same thing with anger. All right, so they're going to kind of alternate between the two of those. All right, let me go through the rest of characteristics, then we'll look at this cute girl's face. So Pittas, they want to be in charge, right? They're like, I want to be the leader. I know what to do. I'm totally here. But that Vata side comes in and creates a little self-doubt about your ability to actually do that. So you might have that part of you that's like, yes, I can do it. I'm going for it. And then the Vata is going to come in and be like, yeah, but can you really? Maybe this isn't such a good idea. I'm thinking this is scary. We should like kind of retreat from this. So it's almost like you've got two parts of you. And if you ever feel like that, like you're conflicted, it's because there are two parts of you in there, right? And what that does is it often will push a Vata Pitta, if they don't recognize this, to look for things that people or things or situations that are weaker that they know they can handle. So they won't actually rise to their potential because they kind of shrink into that fear a little bit because they want to be able to command, but they're afraid to command. Vatas are really good at offering original thoughts. They'll come up with a lot of ideas, and then the Pitta side comes in and can execute. So that's a really good quality together, but they need stability. They tend to be really unstable in emotions as well in how their body functions. So they feel like they finally get themselves balanced, and then it just takes this little thing and they're off again. That's because the Vatas are very into motion and movement. And Pittas, when you combine that air, it blows that fire and you have so much instability. Okay, so that causes problems there. Let's look at our cute girl here. All right, what are we seeing that we think are Pitta? So now that we're learning a lot more about different faces, there's a lot of square angles. Do you see all this through her cheeks, right? You get that side down. Yeah, and Astrid's chiming in with red hair. Yep, she's got that reddish hair. What do we see about her complexion? What are you guys seeing in her complexion here? Lots of freckles. Yeah. So remember, freckling is part of Pitta. So we're seeing more Pitta there too. So I see a lot of Pitta. Now, where are we seeing some Vata? I'm seeing some Vata in a couple of main characteristics. Right through here, right? That long length to her nose. See as a Vata Pitta nose again. Good combo of the two. And then look at her cute lips. This is a really good example of a Vata upper lip and a Pitta lower lip. Now her eyes, while they're not really small, they're more moderate size. They've got that intensity, but they're not super deep set. So they're more on the Pitta side and not so much Vata, but you can see that intensity there. So she's got a lot of Pitta with an underlying Vata, so she leads with her Pitta. And she looks like someone you don't want to mess with, if you ask me. Like, yeah, I might look kind of sweet, but I got this. I got this right here. So that's how Pittas and Vatas work together, okay? They need sweet. Sweet is the best thing for them. So you got to sweeten up a Vata Pitta. If you have one in your life, just focus on sweetening them up through love, through what they're eating, through the circumstances and environments that they're in. They need sweetness brought in. So being kind to them is really useful. They will be very good, loyal friends if you're kind to them. All right, here's our Pitta Kapha. Let's look at this guy. All right, so we have some really good Pitta characteristics that you can see straight off. What are you guys seeing in there? I'm hoping this is helping for you to be able to start to notice and recognize these. This is a good exercise. I see his eyes as being more deep set, but do they look really very medium? I think they almost have a soft largeness to them that shows that Kapha side of him. Yeah, so they're deep set Pitta. and they're a little bit softer and larger. They don't look so intense, right? They don't look like they're going to see through you. They look like more like, hey, how are you, friend? Okay, so there's that Kapha-ness there. His nose is very Pitta. He has a very moderate bridge size. The end of his nose has a little bit of Kapha, but it's not too much, right? You can see that it's just starting to, it's a little softer, but it's not too big. His lips, very Kapha. He has nice lips. Face-wise, he doesn't have a lot of chisel through his cheeks. It's a little more roundness, but you can still see some angularity in his chin. So his face is a combination of that Pitta with a little more of the angularity length, and that Kapha has a little more softness in his cheeks. So when you look at him, you're like, yep, Pitta Kapha right there. Nice combination. This is probably the easiest dosha actually to keep balanced is Pitta Kapha. It's really able to handle the chaotic world because the Kapha gives stability. It gives the structure, the foundation, and Pittas are able to adapt. You might notice about your Pitta friends. They may seem chameleon-like sometimes, but they are very good at adapting to different scenarios in life. They're good with a lot of different people. They can kind of get along with them when they're balanced. And so putting that stability of Kapha, the adaptability of Pitta together makes a Pitta Kapha able to handle stress really, really well. So right now with all the chaos we're dealing with, they're probably doing the best of all of the doshas. They're usually pretty successful in life because they're very well-rounded. The Pitta side of them, very active in their metabolism, burning up the food, right? Kaphas have that powerful physique, so they have that strength, that endurance. Together, they have really good health. So a Pitta Kapha tends to live longer. They tend to have greater health longer if they're doing the things to keep them balanced. They have the perfect foundation for that. The anger of Pitta is tempered by that water of Kapha. So Kapha is really sweet, right? They're a little more grounded, a little more connected to kind of reality. Pittas, when they get angry about crazy things, the Kapha pulls them back. So it keeps them a little more tempered there. They're temperature-wise, they like just more temperate climates, but they do good with the extremes. They do fine with cold or hot. They do pretty good there. And they love to work out. So these are a really good, this dosha is really great for endurance things because unlike Kaphas who don't want to do them but could, Pittas are excited and they're like, oh, I'm competitive. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to do this. And they have the strength to actually do it. So that's a blessing for them. All right, let's go through the rest of our qualities and you can be looking at this gal's cute face. She looks like she wants to just, she looks very intense, doesn't she? So Pitta and Kaphas, they both are moist or oily. We talked about that. This is how that affects them emotionally. Pittas get really arrogant and overconfident, right? They're like, yeah, got this, can do this. Whereas Kaphas kind of, it leads to this smug self-satisfaction, like, yeah, I'm just good. I'm kind of above all that. And those are different emotions. But when they come together with that moist, oily quality, a Pitta Kapha can get a little bit arrogant and have a little bit of like, they just think they're all that. They don't tend to always perceive things the way that they really are. They construct their world the way they want it to be. So these aren't necessarily positive or negative. This is just how it is. And their inability to hear criticism is pretty high. They only want to hear praise. And as a Pitta Kapha, I'm telling you all that stuff is pretty real. So if you're a Pitta Kapha, or if you're managing and dealing and living with one, these are kind of how they deal with emotions. So if you need to give criticism to a Pitta Kapha, couch it with some praise and make sure that they've been fed and make sure that they understand that you love them. Okay, it's good that they have those reassurances because it's hard for them to hear criticism. They need the dryness of Vata. There's not a lot of Vata in there because they tend to not be very introspective and they aren't drawn naturally to spiritual things. And so helping them to have a little bit of that dryness, and we do that through the taste of foods. And it's good to expose them to unpredictable things because if they're always able to plan their life, they're going to get stuck in a huge rut. They'll work all the time. They'll be driven so much that they'll just do one thing. So you want to put them into a situation where they don't have control, and this will help them to stay humble a little bit and also help them to see that there's a reality outside of what they think is true. And that's good for them. Best taste, bitter, and astringent. This is where it gets confusing because people always say, well, how do I eat if I'm a combination? So here we go. If you're a Pitta Kapha, bitter and astringent are going to be your two best tastes. Eat small amounts of pungent and sour. And then the two we didn't include on here, the salty and the, my brain just went, salty and sweet, you want in the very smallest amounts. So we're going to avoid those a little bit. just because that's not good for the Kapha side. You want to reduce the hot, the heavy, and the moist. Increase cool, light, and dry. So this is really useful to when you're planning your food. You go, okay, I don't want to eat too hot, don't want to eat too heavy, don't want to eat too moist, and then I'm going to bring in the opposites of those. So this just helps balance both doshas. And when we look at this gal's face, you can see that roundness of Kapha in her cheeks, right? You can see that Pitta through her nose, just very moderate. Her eye shape is a little bit larger and deep set. So we've got the Pitta deep set, little more of the Kapha with the eyes. And her lips are more of a Pitta size because they're just pretty balanced within her face. But you get that intensity in her eyes and that roundness to her face. And those are both Kapha characteristics. Okay, our last one, Vata Kapha. Vata Kaphas are both cold. And these are the two extremes. And so this one's really important to understand how to work with it because it can be very complicated. Emotionally, they need heat. You gotta warm them up, okay? Vata Kaphas tend to be tall, but their build is more average, like a Pitta. So they'll be tall, but they're not going to be super, super skinny. And they're also not going to be really heavy. It's going to be more moderate. So a tall, moderate person is more of a Vata Kapha. Their coldness is going to show up in their digestive tract. So they're going to tend towards constipation. It also shows up in the breathing with their respiratory issues, and they'll have a lot of mucus. So for the Vata Kaphas, if you're seeing a combination, right, because constipation is more Vata, respiratory disease and illness is more Kapha, then we're putting those two together and saying, oh, okay, these are a combination of the two. It's not that I suddenly have this outlying thing. This is part of my tendencies. And then when we look at this gal's face, you can see that length, the angularity, right, through her cheeks, very pointed through her chin. So there's our pinprick of Vata. Her nose is a little more moderate. I would probably put it more as a Pitta, the angle that we're seeing it as. And her lips is Pitta, but look at her, well, her lips could be Kapha too. So we kind of have a mix there because they do look pretty full for her face, and her eyes are very Kapha. I wanted to point out her hair as well. Kaphas tend towards wavy hair that's like soft, like beach waves, not frizzy, whereas Vatas tend to more frizziness. She's got more of that Vata in her hair. Do you see how it's just kind of frizzy? It looks like she's colored it, so we can't tell based on the color, but there's that frizziness going on. It doesn't have smooth, soft waves. Overall, she just looks like she has kind of a lightness to her. Yeah. So she's got more of that Vata Kapha showing up as a length in her face, whereas our next picture, you'll see that Kapha different in the face shape. Okay. Okay. Here's our cute Vata Kapha girl. Look at those eyes. She's like eyes for years, right? So when we look at her, definitely Kapha eyes. Her lips are a combination. She has a little more Vata top lip, Kapha bottom lip. Face shape is more Kapha, but she still has that point through her chin. Do you see that? Someone who's all Kapha, it's almost like they have no chin, right? It's just this continuation of a circle. She's still got that little angle. So the Vata is showing up in her chin, Kapha is through her cheeks. And then the coloration is a little harder to tell on her skin because she does have on makeup, but you can tell she's got overall a lighter complexion. And when you're really pale, that's our Kapha. When you're more grayish, that's our Vata. Okay, so she looks like she'd be a little more on the pale side for her ethnicity, a little paler. And so she's got more Kapha features, but I just wanted you to see that you can have someone who you initially could look at and go, Kapha. But then when you look closer, you can see, oh, there are some underlying things I can see in her lip and her chin that are a little more Vata and even a little Pitta in her nose. So we're all everything. Okay, last few characteristics here. Vata Kaphas overdo things. They don't know how to constrain. They don't know how to like say, okay, pull on the brakes. They can be really light and open. That's the Vata side. But they can also be really deep and secretive, which is the Kapha side. So if your friend seems like they vacillate, that's also why. And we talked about the emotional side. Kaphas hold things emotionally, whereas Vatas are very overreactive. They go up and down. They're your best friend and then they're super upset about something. They're very happy and then they're like in the depths of despair. And when you combine that with that Kapha energy of deep emotion, it can lead to a Vata Kapha depression. So it's important that they are aware and noticing when they're getting a little too into their deep secretive space and they maybe need to open up to someone. Best taste, sour and pungent. And you're thinking, what on earth? I'm supposed to eat spices and lemons all the time, right? That just means make sure you have those at all meals. You need sour and pungents. small amounts of the salty and the astringent, okay? And then the one I don't have on there is the avoid. So our avoids would be our sweet, right, and our bitter. The sweet increases kapha too much. The bitter increases vata too much. So we keep those a little bit lower. This would look, on a diet way, this would just look like a lot of foods that are a little bit warmer. They have a lot of moisture in them, but they're not heavy. So you would be eating vegetables, but you wouldn't be putting a lot of cream on them. You would be putting a lot of oils on them. You'd be eating grains, but they'd be your lighter grains, things like your quinoa as opposed to maybe your oatmeal. Okay, so it kind of just varies that way. So those are all of our different types. And then our tridoshic. This will be our last one. Really rare. You have to be a very disciplined person with your health to remain disease-free. Tridoshic people are not very healthy. They tend to have issues. This gal in this picture, it's hard to find someone who's got a tridoshic face. And so she was about the closest that I could find. She has that roundness to her cheeks. You can tell they put makeup on to make her look a little more sculptured, but she's got round cheeks. So her kapha there, a little bit more point through her chin, some vata. Her lips have been filled in a bit. They're a little more vata on the top lip, a little more kapha on the bottom lip. Her nose is very vata, just tiny, right? And her eyes are a little bit deep set, which is part of her ethnicity, but they also have a little more largeness to them, so you've got kapha. So we see a mix of all three, that long, narrow face. She's got some vata to the shape of her face. And so tridoshic is not somewhere you want to end up. And often when people are confused about their dosha, they think they're tridoshic just because they're like, well, I must be tridoshic because I have absolutely no idea, right? But it's not very common. Okay, I know that we are kind of getting close to our hour. Do you guys have any like urgent or questions that you're like, I'm really wondering what she was saying about that didn't make sense to me? We'll do more fun with the pictures because it's really helpful to compare, right? You want to compare within a category like eyes. So if you just lined up a whole bunch of pictures of people and looked at eyes, you'd start to see, well, what is small, what is medium, what is deep set, right? And then that helps you with your own diagnosis as well as your family. Because I know that as you start to understand this more, you start to look at everyone around you and you're like, oh, what dosha are you? And why are you acting this way? Oh, it's because you have a lot of vata. And right now, because everyone's wearing masks, the eyes are probably the first place that we can start, right? We can really look at eyes. So my assignment homework for you this week, when you are around people this week, I want you to start noticing eyes and determining if you're seeing Pitta eyes, if you're seeing Vata eyes, if you're seeing Kapha eyes. And just see what that shows for you. Does that match anything you know about those people? If it's someone you know personally, then you can start looking more at the rest of the face. But understanding our doshas, sometimes we avoid getting clear. And it's because we don't want to be stereotyped, right? There's this freedom of expression that we feel like we're losing when we categorize ourselves as a certain dosha. What is really lovely about the doshas is it doesn't categorize you into any specific way of being, right? You still have freedom of choice at all times. What it does allow you to see is the pitfalls that might arise for you within your health. It helps you to see, how does my body metabolize life? How am I taking in all of the senses and using them? And then what should I be aware of? It's no different than knowing that, you know, I have brown hair, and so I'm probably going to have, you know, some coloration changes as I get older, and I might want to color my hair. It doesn't mean, oh, well, this is a horrible thing, I have brown hair. It's just a tendency. So when we can stop attaching to, well, now that's who I have to show up as, you can show up as anyone. You can show up as any of the doshas. It's more, what is the pitfall that might come up for me, and I'm going to be aware of it. So it's like creating a building. We're building a strong foundation. And the more you understand the foundation that you have been given, did you get a foundation that's more sandy and it's shifting? Did you get a foundation that's more made of rock and it's just solid, it's not going to move? Do I have a foundation that's maybe a little more dirt and it kind of can shift, but it tends to stay stable? Because then you know what to do when the storms of life happen to you, okay? So I hope this was helpful for you. I really enjoy looking at doshas. Next month, when we do this, I want to bring you guys on the call because I would love to have an ability for us to compare. And so we're going to do this call next month as one where the cameras can all be on. And that way we can actually talk and put different people up on the screen. If it's something you don't want to do, you can just keep your camera off and just come and watch and learn that way as well. So we're starting the cleanse tomorrow. Guys, check your emails today. It's going to be amazing. Super excited. Let's take a big breath together. Ready? Exhale, let it go. Let's take another deep breath. Close your eyes. I want you to get centered. It's a lot of information. Deep breath in. Exhale, let it go. Get a little grounded into your seat. Ready for the rest of your day, whatever is coming. Drawing in prana one last time. Big breath. And exhale, let it all out. Namaste. Have a beautiful, beautiful day. We'll talk to you guys really soon.